Our next guest definitely does not need an introduction. I just called her the Ryan Seacrest of left hosts, meaning she's so busy, she's accomplishing so much. I don't know how she does it because I can barely function and I don't produce nearly as much as she does. And she has a daily show, kids, family, commute, writing books, many books, and of course has really blown up the show The Hill Rising. We're talking about Krystal Ball, of course. My old friend Krystal, thank you for coming to one of our first episodes. And I couldn't be any more honored because I have to tell you, before you get started, you were probably the inspiration behind my start in TV, given that you gave me early advice. You also got me to run for office for the first time, and I blame you for that. So it's like a pro and a con here, pluses and minuses.
All those things. I don't know that people know how long we've known each other for a long time. So.
Yeah. Many lives, many lives of Krystal and Nomiki.
There is the mutual inspiration all the way around. So thank you.
And somehow we both ended up on the proper side of politics, not the right side, the left side of politics, when I think many who kind of came up with us either just got out entirely or totally sold, probably working for Bloomberg now, to be honest.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Either they're working for Bloomberg or they're aspiring to work for Bloomberg. One of the two. Yeah.
I'm aspiring to work for Bloomberg so I can take his money and then shit on him in public. I feel like
is there like an internal revolution that we need to foment within the Bloombergs? Like we could join up with Bloomberg and then unionize his staff kind of thing.
Yes. I love that. His influencers. Yeah. So Krystal, you just wrote a book called The Populist Guide to 2020, a new right and new left are rising. I can't even say it properly. Congratulations. You have hit #1 in the politics section on Amazon. I'm blown away. Socialists are taking over. It's extraordinary. But I want to talk a little bit more about how you got started. I mean, I have known you a long time, and I think many young people are just learning about you. But there are folks who remember you from MSNBC and before. So how did you get started in politics? Let's just rewind, a decade and a half.
Yeah. So my start in politics, I think it's a lot like, a lot of people who first got engaged after the Trump election and felt like, oh my God, we have this existential situation and I have to get involved and be more active in a way that I never have been before. And for some people that meant running for office, running for Congress, things that they had never even conceived of being possible for themselves. I kind of had that moment back in 2008, 2009, 2010, when I ran for Congress. I really hadn't been particularly political active. I was sort of normally engaged citizen. I think like a lot of people of our age, I was really activated by the Iraq War opposition in particular. And then as I started to become more engulfed in what was going on in our politics, some of the issues that still motivate me today were what sparked my interest in running for office. So, for example, I was a new mom at that point. I had my oldest daughter in 2008, actually right during the height of the primary with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And I remember going and shopping for baby bottles and literally looking and realizing that I had to be so educated to keep from buying the baby bottles that had the toxic BPA in them because some lawmakers have been paid off by like a plastics lobby or whatever. And it just to me was so symbolic of how even the most sacred things in our nation, like the health of our children and our infants, had been corrupted by a political system that had been rigged and bought. So those little realizations caused me to want to get more involved, but I was kind of pulling my hair out, not knowing what direction to go in. And it was my husband, honestly, who was like, you should run for Congress. And I was just like, that's insane, right? Absolutely not. He was like, look at this guy who represents the seat right now. This guy is so lame. And I looked at him and I was like, you know what? That guy is really lame. I'm better than him. Like, I may not be perfect, but I'm at least better than that guy. So I said, what the hell? What's the worst thing that happens? I run and I lose. Big deal. I go back to my life. At least I tried, right? So I jump into this thing head first. I win a very contentious Democratic primary against a sort of blue dog, retired Army colonel who's been planning on running for the seat for a long time.
Wait, hang on a second. Can we just stop for a second? You just won the primary. Like, that is a huge achievement at that time, pre-DSA, massive DSA at least, pre-Justice Democrats, pre-Bernie.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Well, I mean, I think I was a lot less, I mean, in a lot of ways, I was more of a mainstream progressive at that point. But I did take some views that, especially in my rural Virginia district, were, you know, not mainstream views at the time. I mean, at that time, remember, Barack Obama didn't support gay marriage. Hillary Clinton didn't support gay marriage. And yet there I was, like, proudly on my website, these are my values. This is who I am, and I'm not going to change. Mm-hmm. And that resonated with people. I mean, it was my first attempt at really putting my faith in people and saying, you know what, if I tell you honestly who I am, I believe that even if you disagree with me, that I may be able to win over support from people who have different views, because I respect them enough to be honest and make the case for what I believe in. So that worked out in the primary. In the general election during the Tea Party wave, it was a little bit more challenging. And the thing, and probably some of your viewers already know this, the thing that actually gave me my launch from there into media, which was completely unplanned and unanticipated, was close to Election Day. Here I am, this young woman, 28 years old, this weirdo name, right? This like porn star name, as many people have decided to tell me. And I had worked so hard to build this like credibility with people where they took me seriously and treated me as a real candidate and a real leader because of the ideas and what I wanted to do for the district, for the country. And then shortly before Election Day, some local blogger posts photos of me that somebody had leaked to them at a party, like completely clothed, fully of age, nothing remotely scandalous by today's standards. But at the time they were shocking because they were like sexually suggestive. And oh my God, how could we? And all the pearls in the land were clutched, right? So this massive cable news story.
Oh my God, it was out of control.
I'm sure you remember us all very well. It was devastating to me. Now I can laugh about it because it's hilarious. But at the time, this was very hard for me to take. And my advisors were all like, say it's not you. Or they were like, you know, just don't say anything at all. I was like, that's bullshit. You know what? This is sexist. This is going to happen to other young women, and I'm going to call it out, and we'll see what happens. So I did. And that actually, after I then lost, that was actually what gave me the ability to transition into media, because some of the shows that had me on to talk about this scandal then wanted to have me back just to talk about politics, talk about elections, and it all snowballed from there. So it was a completely sort of accidental path that set me on the course that I, you know, have followed since then.
It's poetic in many ways. I mean, look where the Tea Party is now.
It is poetic because the thing that they used to try to destroy me is what gave me my power, Nomiki.
Right.
Platform.
That is my ringtone now. We've both gone through that in many ways, and we have to. Yeah, and I think it's a great lesson for the left and for other candidates who are going through it, have gone through it, or definitely will go through it. You know, you ended up hosting a show called The Cycle on MSNBC. That's how my parents learned about you. Still fans of yours. They've evolved as you've evolved. But I do want to talk a little bit before we go into sort of the current state of politics and how you ended up where you are today. You know, you brought up this thing about you know, evolving in politics is very natural, and that's sort of what we want people to do. Bobby Kennedy, you know, don't forget, like Bobby Kennedy evolved, and he became a much more progressive, left-leaning Democrat before he was killed tragically. But if you go back 15 years prior, you know, he was a lawyer for the McCarthy hearings. I mean, this is how hopefully we want our politicians to grow, to learn from mistakes and be more connected with the people. But I think you and I are both of that age where there wasn't really a left movement. If so, it was a little fringy, cool, but not something that you could massively mobilize around or organize. And I think that, you know, there was a lack of education in particular around issues and what could really be brought to the table. So I also, you know, I was involved in the Obama campaign in 2008 and in 2012. And I think that era in some ways has stigmatized some people in that, you know, even in 2015, both you and I supported Joe Biden. And this has now become a tool, a weapon against us by the centrists to essentially claim purity politics against us. But for young people who are just starting in politics right now, I mean, thank God they're starting at this point, because, you know, what is the future of the left going to be? I mean, how much more left can we get, and how much more amazing? And in 20 years from now, what are they going to be saying about the Zennials or whatever you call them? And how they they stand on politics. But for you, I mean, where's the boundary for someone who came up in a different era and the politics reflected of that era and was probably ahead of the curve then to where they are now? I mean, calling out Joe Biden's track record 30 years ago, what in his track record matters now that would reflect who he is as a person today versus something that was just reflective of an era?
Yeah, well, I think that's important, right? The growth trajectory.
That's right.
Like, if you are a different person today, God bless you, come on in. We're all for it, right? We want that growth. And God, if you haven't evolved in the Trump era, what have you been doing, right? If you haven't learned something about this country and this political moment that we're living through right here and around the world, you must have your head buried in the sand. The problem is when people really haven't fundamentally changed.
That's right.
Or haven't learned those lessons from the past. I mean, if we're using Joe Biden specifically, which I almost feel bad at this point because he's so sort of sad and forlorn in the polls and in his positioning, but it is really important to say he still supports TPP.
That's right.
Right? He still supports many aspects of the crime bill in the 90s that has incarcerated a generation of young Black men, right? He still supports criminalizing marijuana even. I mean, these are very retrograde views. So he still is dishonest about his, not only his vote for the Iraq War, but we have to remember he was a leader in helping to platform the propaganda that led us into the Iraq War. And he still lies and dissembles about that. I mean, he's the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Mm-hmm. Incredibly powerful, the most powerful Democrat in terms of his positioning and ability to have pushed back against that propaganda and kept us out of that war. The most disastrous blunder, certainly of my lifetime, the consequences of which not only does our generation deal with, but generation after generation to come. So that for me is the piece. It's, have you genuinely reflected on this and seen the consequences and made a change? Or are you still that person who had that bad judgment all these many times and would basically do it all again? That's the way I think about it for me. In terms of my own evolution, it's funny because I watch, I actually just did a piece today on Rising about Elizabeth Warren and how disappointing it is to me the way that she has evolved. You probably remember this piece I did at MSNBC back in 2014, asking Hillary not to run because I knew she was going to be a disaster for all the reasons that she ended up being a disaster, which were readily apparent at the time, right? This wasn't rocket science. And at the end of that piece, I said, the person I really want is someone who is so mission driven, who has pushed back on the Obama administration's appointees of corporate interests over public interest, and who has held banksters' feet to the fire, right? Remember how she would aggressively question these guys and go after the Obama administration for not having prosecuted any of them. It's that is the champion that we need. Mm-hmm. And it breaks my heart to look back at that and realize, I don't think I was just deluding myself, because those things took real courage at the time. But to now see her basically, side with the tax on Medicare for all, side with those who are, going after that progressive priority, stabbing her friend and supposed ally Bernie Sanders in the back multiple times. Mm-hmm. It's how did we get to this place? It really makes me sad. But why I started to tell the stories, because when I look back at some of the stuff from when I was at MSNBC, it's all there, the concern about plutocrats and inequality and coming out of Occupy Wall Street and this populist anger that we really lay out in the book is all there. But I think, number one, I was too trusting. This was the big mistake. I saw very clearly the problems with the Republican Party. Those were manifest to me, and I was unrepentant in calling them out. But I was really blind to this sort of deep corruption and rot in the Democratic Party. I really thought that these were the good guys, and that, sure, they're not perfect and they make mistakes, but I could not see how this was essentially a power-hungry monopoly that had privileged the interest of the affluent and abandoned their working class roots. And I also accepted the structure of this idea of what you're allowed to ask for as a progressive.
That's right.
Right. So in the affordable healthcare debate, I was in favor of a public option. I was fighting for a public option. Absolutely. But it never occurred to me like, oh my God, we could be pushing for single payer. That was just, I accepted the sort of boundaries of where we were allowed to be. And I was like, I'm pushing up against the left edge and that's as far as I will go. And I just know.
How much of that was from the cable news industry? Like being at MSNBC, was some of that just sort of, was it directly told to you, or was it just sort of you knew the boundaries of what you were allowed to say on cable news?
Mostly it was just, but it's also, and also you don't even realize the boundaries that are being put on you in some ways, and the framing of the stories and what is, what you're supposed to cover and all of that. I mean, some of it you just don't even notice is going on around you, or at least I was not wise enough to really be attuned to all of that. Some of it, though, was quite explicit. Like after I did that piece on Hillary Clinton, I got a call that essentially somebody from Clinton land had threatened access, said, we don't like the way you're covering her, and we didn't like the way you covered her last time, and we're not going to play ball with you if you continue this direction. I wasn't told I couldn't say anything, but I was told next time I did a monologue on Hillary Clinton, it had to be approved by the president of the network.
Oh my God.
Very unusual. Like, this is not normal protocol, right? So some of it was explicit. I was also told, like, nobody cares about TPP, which is just more of a less nefarious and more of a class bias thing, right? You're working in New York, you're in, affluent circles with media elites. Nobody in your circle cares about TPP. It's not important to your people. And the ratings are very imprecise. So you can't look and really say exactly like this segment worked and this didn't. The way on YouTube, you really can tell what people respond to and what they don't. So it's all but based on gut instinct and intuition. And so the intuition, a couple things that we were told no one cared about, TPP was one of them, and climate change was definitely another one of them.
That's hard to believe. I can't believe MSNBC at that time was hosting these big rallies and concerts in Central Park over climate change, literally. I mean, it was like a branding scheme. It was Climate Week, and this is stuff that they used to do. I can't believe that they would say nobody cares about climate change. I believe it. I'm not saying I can't believe it. It's mind blowing to me.
That was the conventional wisdom. And it was like seen as kind of like, if you did a climate change segment, there was like a cost to that. Like you could do it, but you should know that it's probably no one's going to really watch it or care. Right. So it's nice. You can do it, but
So what did they want you to cover? What kind of things back then? I mean, just a couple of years ago, but back then, what were they into covering? I mean, this is also, Bernie had announced at this point, or in 2015, he had announced in, I believe, June. And I think both you and I were still like sort of, toying with Biden separately. It wasn't like we were working together, but we were toying with Biden. And then I know for myself, I joined the Bernie campaign in the fall. But was MSNBC covering Bernie when he first announced? Was it?
Not very much. He was definitely not taken seriously. And this was right at the end of my tenure there, because it was summer of 2015 when our show was canceled. And, for me with Biden, I was just like, God, we need an alternative to Hillary.
That's right.
This is really going to be bad. And his plan was, I'm sure you remember this too, to run to her left. Right. That was the political positioning that he was planning on. And, I couldn't have foreseen, as I think that, almost no one could. Even the Sanders people who were planning the campaign couldn't have foreseen how much and how quickly he would blow up. Again, I was in these like blinders of, I didn't think that you were allowed to ask for that. Right. Like too good. We can't ask for that. So, no, the one person I will give credit to, who is a friend and is just a brilliant guy, just has this like brain on him that you can't possibly imagine, is Steve Kornacki.
Yes.
He was from New England and said, look, Bernie Sanders is in position to do better than you all think because he's from Vermont. The early states are very favorable to him. That Iowa and New Hampshire had potential upside for Bernie Sanders. And I think also, look, he has a actually good gut instinct in politics. And I think he saw that there would be a desire to have a Clinton alternative. So he wrote a piece predicting that Sanders would outperform what people thought, and it turned out to be, right on the money. But overall, there was like a dismissal of his candidacy. No one really took it serious. Like the Beltway, people couldn't wrap their heads around it. And Trump was like a sideshow, he was hilarious and he was like ridiculous and let's cover him just as entertainment. Right. But I think it was hard for them to take Bernie seriously. And then how this thing perpetuates, right? Like the Clinton people have a whole world of operatives. Many of them are employed in cable news, and certainly that the access that you get to that campaign is dependent on your coverage of it. And so that changes the way the whole thing is handled.
It's and seeing how it's shifted even the last couple of years since Trump. I mean, it's almost like the lessons from Trump not giving him too much exposure have been pushed on Bernie in many ways. They don't want to give Bernie too much exposure because maybe they think that exposing him on cable news attributed to his rise. I clearly, we're looking at it right now. I mean, they've only given him negative coverage in the last year, and it's very little. Literally leaving him off screen in polls and in headlines, and it's growing the movement. There was an interview a couple of days ago, you probably saw it, where Ari Melber from MSNBC, your former co-host, was out on the trail in New Hampshire interviewing voters, and an older woman said, I didn't know who I was voting for, and then I finally decided I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. And he goes, well, why is that? She goes, well, I watch a lot of MSNBC, and he made a little quip like, oh, thanks, ha ha ha. And then she said, well, I was upset about the coverage that you have been giving Bernie Sanders. So I'm curious. I mean, since you're so tapped into this, and
that woman is
she is a hero. I'm like, get her on the campaign trail. We need all of that. But you understand how segments are pitched, how the micro targeting works, and the analytics, everything that goes on behind the scenes, as well as this news side of movement politics through independent media online.
Yeah.
So I wonder, do you have a sense of how many people are probably in her camp who watch cable news, our parents' age, who are getting turned off?
That's impossible to say. I couldn't possibly tell you, but I think it says everything. The fact that, Bernie Sanders has no cable news network that is friendly to him, right? They are all, actually Fox is probably more fair to him, honestly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Tucker Carlson is a Bernie bro now.
I mean, I was on with Tucker the other night, which I know is very controversial, and I understand that. But my philosophy on that is I'm not going to see millions and millions of people if I have an opportunity to talk about progressive politics with them. It was the most fair segment on Bernie Sanders that I've done on cable news maybe ever. It's like, what is happening here? It was the same night that over on MSNBC, Chuck Todd was smearing Bernie supporters as brown shirts, right? So that was the dichotomy. But people are seeing, they're thinking for themselves, otherwise he wouldn't be winning. That's, to me, the greatest metric of how much they have failed and how much credibility they have lost. They've lost a lot of credibility in the Trump era, but even before that, I mean, the same people that cheerleaded us into the frickin' Iraq war, they're now all paid to come in and opine on the liberal network. It's insane. The same people who never saw the financial collapse coming are still over on CNBC and still running the, business reporting on all these networks. There's just no credibility left. And so they get very upset when Trump cries fake news, which I understand, and his attacks on the press are way over the line. Mm-hmm. They also freak out when Bernie rightly points out that, look, the fact that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, maybe that affects their coverage and they lose their minds about this. There's never any self-reflection about what did we do that may have caused this lapse in trust, right? Where are there genuine concerns here? Are there real roots in that mistrust? And so rather than doing any of that self-reflection, they'll either blame, the people who level the criticism, or they'll blame the consumers themselves. Basically, oh, well, these stupid people just can't understand what brave and perfect work that we're doing. I would have thought, I guess I did not delude myself really into thinking that there would be any self-reflection after Trump was elected, because ultimately it was good for them, right? It was good for the business bottom line. And that was the thing that mattered most. So while there is concern about the sort of lack of civility and the breaking of the norms and guardrails and all of those things, they're also kind of happy to feed at the ratings trough. They didn't go from the lesson they learned from giving Trump all this coverage and electing him wasn't, maybe we should focus on other things and root causes and issues that led to his rise. It was okay, well, rather than just doing, and this is Matt Taibbi in his book Hating, he says this, like, their lesson was, okay, instead of doing 10,000 hours of Trump, we'll do 10,000 hours of Trump is bad, right? That was
exactly
kind of the lesson.
And it's interesting because they're actually doing some of the work for us when they start to go after Sinclair Broadcasting System or the corruption of Fox News. The funny thing is for the most part, it's the same backers. With the exception of human. You look at the News Corps board. I think to this day, the News Corps board, which is, the proprietor, now Disney owns them, but they own Fox News, right? The News Corps board has actual former Clinton administration officials on it. So it's the old George Carlin thing. It's the same people, give or take a few donors here and there, give or take a few advertisers here and there. And it creates, it really stems from the top, of course. I'm sure there is an agenda. I'll say this. I'm sure there's an agenda that Phil Griffin has an agenda and that whoever's running Fox News now has an agenda that reflects in some way the financial support they're getting. And that trickles down. Does every segment producer and booker understand that? Probably not. But there's often direction, right? Like, don't have this person back on, or maybe reschedule them, or, change the questions a little bit. I'm sure you would get things in your earpiece every once in a while saying, move on or wrap it up.
Inherently, it's, humans are very good analyzers of their environment. And very much what sort of topics, questions, behaviors will get you praise and career elevation and what won't. Mm-hmm. And we're also very good at rationalizers, right? So going back to my Hillary Clinton example, when I was told, you can still say what you want, but it's got to be approved by the president of the network. Mm-hmm. Did that affect my coverage of her? Yeah, probably. Like, I'm a human being, that made me think twice. Like, is it really that made me have to ask the question, is it really worth me saying this thing today? Right? Because I know there's a cost. And that's happening on a micro level, every day, with every segment, with every question, with every decision. That's happening on a micro level. And many times the people who are doing it, they really don't even realize, the structures and incentives that are shaping their behavior. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what happened with the Iowa caucus, where, I don't think there was I can't say for sure there wasn't a grand conspiracy, to be honest with you. But let's say that there was no grand conspiracy for the sake of argument. But every single decision went for Pete and against Bernie. Mm-hmm. Every time there was a decision matrix, right? The choice was made to go pro Pete, anti Bernie. So let's spike the poll that shows Bernie leading and Pete not doing well. Right. Okay. Complaints. Yes, let's do that. Can you imagine if Bernie called to complain, please? It would never have spiked that poll, right? Andrew Yang was left off of many, many surveys. Exactly. Nobody ever cared, ever, right? So there's that. And then should we use the app maker that has direct ties to Pete's campaign and Pete's swag all over their office and is super cozy with the Iowa Democratic Party chair? Like, should we do that? Mm-hmm. Sure, of course. If it was Bernie that, had the ties to the app maker, do you think that they would have done that? Absolutely not. Exactly. Should we release these partial results that show Pete doing well, even though they're incomplete and wrong? Yes. Should we correct these errors? The errors in calculus that we can see with our own eyes that the math is wrong. Should we correct them at risk of taking the win away from Pete? Mm-hmm. Should we do that? No, because that could be bad for Pete and it could be good for Bernie. So we're not going to do it. Should we count the precincts that are good for Bernie at the absolute end and maybe rethink how we're counting these satellite caucuses? And right, once you get to the satellite caucuses where the Black and brown working class people the Democratic Party is supposed to care so much about have fought to be able to even vote at these caucuses. Once we get to those, then suddenly enough is enough. We got to stop. We got to recanvass. And I don't know if you're doing these figures right. You may be counting these Black and brown voters too much. I mean, it's just so blatant. And it's all about your connections, your bias, your preconceived notions of what's fair and what's not. And every actor involved may well have thought that what they were doing was precisely right and that they were really just making the best decision they could at the time. But people are so shaped by those relationships and those incentives and by their own ideological bias.
Deconstructing this is very important. It's something Sam Cedar from the Majority Report and I have debated, and I say rigging, he says it's not rigging, but we both agree on what happened. It's literally the label you attach to it, and it's. I mean, in the case of the Iowa caucus or cable news networks or just any of these, there is something that stems from the top, and so. I think that's what's so powerful about Bernie Sanders' movement and DSA and many organizations that have popped up like Our Revolution. It's very grassroots. It's decentralized. You look at the unions that perform the most democratically, they're more decentralized. You look at the ones that are causing chaos, like the culinary workers, they're very leadership driven. So that stuff, that erodes an organization, but there's fear, whether a person consciously knows that they're contributing to the quote unquote rigging, or they're more afraid of challenging the person who hands them their check at the end of the day, or their power, or their tickets to the inauguration, or, the hotel rooms they get at the DNC. I mean, this is the power, the bartering that comes with power is sometimes very minimal at the end of the day. I mean, it could just literally be access. It could be, I know this person, I can call them up.
Totally. A lot of times that's it. I mean, you and I both know plenty of these donor types, right? And how they think and how they work and whatever. And some of them really do want a specific thing. You do have transactional donations, but oftentimes they just want to be able to get the president of the United States on the line and be invited to the Christmas party and have that framed photo of them together that sits on their office desk. Like, that is actually, for many of them, that's all that they want, is that feeling of proximity to power, that feeling of I am important, right? And so they hate Bernie Sanders because they know they will never get that with him. Never. They will not be able to call him up and have him humor them, listen to their dumb ideas and stroke their sweet little egos and make them feel special. Like, he's never going to do that. Just like at the New York Times editorial board when he was like, I'm not going to call you on your birthday, right? That's actually a real thing to these people. It's like, I need that proximity and that access and that validation that I matter and I'm meaningful, and they will never get that from him. On the rigging thing, I think an important point on this, because I've thought this through myself, like, is that word too strong? But I think you and I suspect Sam would all agree with the phrasing that the economy is rigged for the interest of the wealthy and the powerful, right? And it's a similar kind of rigging. It's not like there's one grand conspiracy, right, where they all get together and say, this is what we're going to do. It's a series of incentives, trade-offs, access, power, decision matrix that always goes in their favor and against the working class. That is the rigging. And so that is the same exact dynamic that's going on at an Iowa caucus or at an MSNBC or at a New York Times or with the culinary workers. It's the exact same type of rigging.
That's beautiful. I think that's a subject for a book. If you want to work on that together, I'm happy to do so. I'll take the DNC, you take the media side, and we'll meet in the middle.
There we go.
Speaking of, because I know you have to go, let's talk a little bit about your book and where people can find it. How did you write it so fast? That's what it's just so productive.
Well, I mean, we write every day for the show. So we're in the discipline of writing, and the book is a collection of what we do on the show. What I realized as we were watching this is that the mainstream, the elite media was basically getting every aspect of the primary wrong. And we were able on our show and with, our great guests, including yourself, who help us figure out all of this every day, to really have a fair understanding of what was happening, what was likely to happen, who was going to succeed, who was going to fall down, et cetera. And it occurred to me that we had these sort of central themes of the show that had come together organically. And I wanted to pull those together in a book to kind of synthesize them into, an understandable concept. So the four themes in the book are core rut, which is like the source of the populist anger, right? Why is it that growth is good and the stock market is high and unemployment is low? And you have people literally so miserable that they are killing themselves or drinking themselves to death, et cetera. What is going on there? What does that look like? What values were we fed that were so wrong and ill-suited to the human condition that people would end up in this place in such a wealthy nation. So that's the core rot section. We tackle the media bias, exactly this conversation we're having. Like, is it a conspiracy? What are the incentives? How does this work? What candidates are they going to love? What candidates are they going to hate? What are the techniques that they use to erase candidates and ideas that they don't like and to manufacture consent? We do that one. We talk about identity, which is like such a tricky issue to tackle in a respectful and thoughtful way. But oftentimes neoliberals have really weaponized trailblazing identities to preserve the status quo, right? I mean, you see that with Pete, like, you know, he's a young guy and he's gay, so that's progress. And it's like, no, it's not really progress for the many, many LGBTQ citizens who are working class, who are working poor, who are struggling, who care more about what those policies are going to do for their lives than about the identity of the person pushing those policies. So we get into that, and then we get into theories of change, which is like, okay, so if we have a working class centric politics, how do we actually affect change that is going to benefit the working class and recenter our politics in the Democratic Party, you know, from our perspective in particular on the working class, and actually make it work? One of the essays that I'm most proud of draws on some of the lessons of Bertie's time as mayor of Burlington, and what he was able to achieve there against just the, you know, fierce opposition from the Democrats and the Republicans, and, you know, in town and in the entire state. So that's the book. I'm really excited about it. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it at Amazon. It's on Kindle. Many people have asked. The audiobook is done. It's just being reviewed by the gods of Amazon. So we're waiting for that to be complete. It should be up next week or the week after. And for those of you who have bought the book, I couldn't be more grateful. You know, it's a great way to say, like, F you to Neera Tanden is basically the bottom line. And
she's literally in every segment that we've produced on the show. At this point, I'm like, her ears must be ringing, her Google alerts must be going off. Every single segment ends with Neera Tanden.
Yeah, that's the ethos. But yeah, we love, for those of you who've bought the book or are going to buy the book, we love when you post your photos too, and we'll try to reshare them if you tag us in it. So thank you so much, Nomiki, for having me.
Krystal, you're amazing. Dear friend. Hopefully you'll come back. We can trade show appearances, and when you come to New York, we'd love to have you here as well.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Let's make that happen.
Fantastic. Thank you, Krystal.
Thank you.